the early 1930s, survival wasn't about abundance, it was about stretching almost nothing into something that could pass as a meal. A single loaf of bread, costing just a few cents, became the foundation of daily life for millions. Meat was rare, often reserved for once a week if that. So families, especially mothers, turned to creativity, transforming the simplest ingredients into sandwiches that could quiet hunger, even if only temporarily. Take the most basic example: plain bread with a thin smear of butter. It wasn't really a recipe, it was a necessity. When unemployment soared and food lines stretched around entire city blocks, this humble combination became dinner. Parents sliced bread thicker than usual, trying to create the illusion of fullness. Sometimes, a pinch of sugar was sprinkled on top, especially for children, turning hardship into something that almost felt like a treat. But when butter wasn't available, people adapted. Onion sandwiches emerged, just raw onion slices between bread. The sharp bite of the onion gave the illusion of flavor and substance, tricking the senses into feeling satisfied. In rural areas, where onions could be grown in small gardens, this was essentially a free meal. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Then came the sugar sandwich, simple, cheap, and beloved by children. Bread, a little butter, and a generous sprinkle of sugar created a crunchy, sweet bite that felt like dessert in a time when desserts barely existed. Some families added cinnamon if they had it, making the kitchen smell warm and comforting, even when cupboards were nearly empty. And when even those ingredients ran low, condiments took center stage. Ketchup sandwiches, bread with nothing but a layer of ketchup, became common. It sounds strange today, but back in, it was a way to make plain bread edible. The tangy sweetness gave just enough flavor to keep going. These weren't just meals. They were survival strategies, built on resilience and imagination. Every bite carried a quiet determination to make it through another day. But these were only the simplest creations, because what came next pushed creativity even further, turning scraps and leftovers into surprisingly filling meals. As the Depression deepened, families learned to use every last bit of food. Nothing was wasted. Even the smallest leftovers could become the centerpiece of a meal when placed between two slices of bread. Lard sandwiches, for example, became a staple in many homes. When butter was too expensive, rendered animal fat filled the gap. Spread on bread with a sprinkle of salt, it provided much-needed calories. It wasn't fancy, but it kept people going. Similarly, mayonnaise sandwiches offered a surprisingly effective solution. Thick, creamy, and calorie-dense. Mayo alone could turn bread into a filling meal. Leftovers played an even bigger role. Mashed potatoes from the night before were often repurposed into sandwiches the next day. Cold, dense, and starchy, they provided energy that lasted for hours. Some families even fried the potatoes first, adding a bit of texture and warmth. Beans were another lifesaver. Cheap and packed with protein, they were often served hot for dinner, and then reused cold in sandwiches for lunch. A simple mash of baked beans on bread could fuel a long day of hard labor. Then there were combinations that sound unusual today but worked surprisingly well, like peanut butter and pickles. The creamy richness of peanut butter paired with the salty crunch of pickles created a balance of flavors that people genuinely enjoyed. It wasn't planned, it was discovered out of necessity. Egg sandwiches also became essential, especially for families who kept chickens. A single fried egg between bread provided protein and warmth, making it one of the most reliable meals of the time. And in the summer, tomato sandwiches brought a rare moment of freshness. Thick slices of ripe tomato, a bit of mayonnaise, and a sprinkle of salt created something that felt almost luxurious. These meals proved one thing: survival wasn't just about having food, it was about knowing how to use it. But even with all this resourcefulness, some of the most surprising sandwiches came from unexpected ingredients: sweet, strange, and sometimes unbelievably clever. Not all Depression-era sandwiches were savory. In fact, some of the most memorable ones leaned toward sweetness, often because sugar was one of the few affordable comforts available. Banana sandwiches were a perfect example. Bananas were cheap and widely available, making them a rare fruit that families could afford. Sliced onto bread, sometimes with a bit of butter or sugar, they became a soft, sweet meal that children loved. Another favorite was the peanut butter and banana combination. Together, they created a surprisingly balanced meal: protein, fat, and natural sugar all in one. It wasn't just tasty, it was practical and filling. Then there was the condensed milk sandwich, thick, sweet, and packed with calories. Condensed milk spread over bread felt like a luxury. For many children, it was the closest thing to dessert they experienced regularly. Syrup sandwiches were also common, especially in rural areas. Whether it was corn syrup or molasses, the sticky sweetness soaked into the bread, creating a quick burst of energy. But perhaps the most creative invention was the mock apple pie sandwich. Using crackers soaked in sweetened lemon water and spices, families recreated the taste of apple filling without apples. Spread between bread, it became a portable version of a dessert that many couldn't afford to make the traditional way. Even apple butter, when available, transformed simple bread into something rich and flavorful. Made by slowly cooking down apples with spices, it could last for months and add variety to otherwise repetitive meals. These sweet sandwiches weren't just about taste, they were about comfort. They gave families, especially children, something to look forward to in difficult times. But as creative as these were, some sandwiches weren't about taste at all, they were about pure survival, and they revealed just how tough those years truly were. As conditions worsened, sandwiches became less about flavor and more about necessity. Some of the creations from this time reflect just how desperate things could get. Mustard sandwiches, for instance, were exactly what they sound like, bread with a layer of mustard. The sharp taste helped mask stale bread, making it easier to eat. It wasn't enjoyable, but it served a purpose. Bacon grease sandwiches followed a similar idea. Families saved every drop of fat from cooking, and when food ran low, that grease was spread onto bread. It carried just enough flavor to remind people of better meals. Cornbread sandwiches also became common in regions where wheat was scarce. Made from cornmeal, these dense patties replaced traditional bread and were filled with whatever was available. Then came to cheese dream, an open-faced sandwich with melted cheese broiled on top. It was simple but felt indulgent compared to other meals. But perhaps the most powerful example was the wish sandwich. 2 slices of bread with nothing inside. The name came from the idea that you wished for something to put between them. It was a quiet, heartbreaking reflection of the times. And yet, even in these moments, people kept going. They found ways to turn almost nothing into something again and again. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get any simpler. One final group of sandwiches showed the true ingenuity and resilience of an entire generation. At the heart of it all were the sandwiches that truly sustained people. The ones that balanced simplicity with just enough nutrition to keep going. The peanut butter sandwich stood above the rest. Affordable, long-lasting, and packed with protein, it became a cornerstone of survival. For many children, it was the one consistent meal they could rely on. Then there was the bread and gravy sandwich. Using leftover drippings from meat, families created a thin gravy and poured it over bread or tucked it between slices. It carried the flavor of meals long gone, stretching them just a little further. Hot meals like this were rare, making them feel special even when they were made from scraps. What makes these sandwiches remarkable isn't just what they were made of, but what they represent. Each one tells a story of resilience, creativity, and determination. Familias didn't give up. They adapted. They used what they had, no matter how little, and found a way to survive. Today, many of these combinations might seem unusual or even unappetizing. But during that time, they kept people moving, working, and hoping for better days. And maybe that's why they still matter. Because they remind us that even in the hardest times, people find a way. So here's a challenge. Try one of these sandwiches yourself. Maybe the peanut butter and pickle, or the simple tomato and fresh bread. Then come back and ask yourself, were these really just meals or were they something much more?